Scotland is famed around the world for stunning scenery and notorious for its somewhat unpredictable weather.
It's hardly a proud boast that it rains for 265 days a year in the Western Highlands, or that the summer temperature only ever reaches an average of 16 degrees. But this is an elemental country, a place where wind, rain, snow, and sometimes even sunshine can take you by surprise.
In this series, I'm braving the weather and retracing the routes taken by some of the early tourists to Scotland. From as early as 1820, publishers began producing tourist guidebooks, and Black's Picturesque Guide to Scotland was one of the first. A copy of this wonderful volume has been in my family for generations. It was always kept in my father's car when we went on holiday. Now I'm letting its pages guide me again on my 6 grand tours of Scotland. On the road, I'll also be dipping into the notes and jottings of some early travellers to hear about their experiences. This time, I'm en route to one of the wildest parts of Scotland, where you can find nature in all its elemental glory, which sometimes means 4 seasons in one day. The second of my grand tours takes me through the Northwest Highlands and across the very top of mainland Scotland. My journey starts here in Torridon, which Black's guidebook says is famed for its savage barrenness.
Not only is this one of the wildest and most beautiful parts of Scotland, it's also one of the most remote. And even in Victorian times, a horse and carriage could only take you so far. After that, it was a case of a ride on Shank's pony, on your plates of meat, in other words, on your own 2 feet.
The Victorians were great walkers, and gentlemen prided themselves on how far they could travel on foot. These walks, or peregrinations as they were grandly called, took the discerning tourist right off the beaten track.
One Victorian gent who was very proud of his pedestrian exertions was the Reverend Thomas Grierson, Minister of Kirkbean. Now, Grierson was a formidable man and an even more formidable walker, covering enormous distances on foot.
In 1851, Grierson wrote a guide for the pedestrian tourist in which he cheerfully recommends others to follow literally in his footsteps across Scotland. The best of all steeds for the Highlands are a man's own legs. In no direction can mountain scenery be viewed so satisfactorily as on foot. So, taking the Reverend Grierson's advice to heart, I've come to this remote part of Scotland in search of a place I've heard about but have never been to.
Now, this is where I want to get to. It's a tiny wee island in a loch, on an island, which is itself in a bigger loch. It's a kind of Chinese box of a location and a place I've always wanted to visit. But to get there, I'm going to have to rest my legs and take a boat.
This is Loch Maree, which is often referred to as the most beautiful in the Highlands. I'm heading for an island in the middle of the loch called Ellen Suvan. But as most visitors to Scotland have found, you've always got to keep one eye on the weather.
Well, the wind's picking up and there's a black cloud on the horizon, as usual. So I'll need to put some speed on and make a landing on my island before the weather gets any worse.
As Black's guidebook advises, the climate of Scotland is extremely variable. East and northeast winds are felt severely during spring and early summer. And it goes on to warn the traveller of heavy rainfall, especially in the west.
Now, these islands are truly amazing because here you'll find some of the least disturbed natural environments anywhere in Britain, which is what makes them so important. And just listen. The sound of nature, the sound of the elements.
This is an undisturbed haven for wildlife, and the Loch Maree Islands are protected by Scottish Natural Heritage, who have designated it a National Nature Reserve. The trees here are precious remnants of the once extensive Caledonian pine forest that covered much of the Highlands in ancient times.
Inevitably, of course, that's the rain on. In fact, it looks like it's going to be on and off all day. What do you expect? This is the West Highlands after all, but beautiful nonetheless.
Following a deer track beneath the trees, I make my way through a landscape that feels ancient and unchanged, almost untouched by human hand.
Now I've reached the Loch on Ellen Suvan, and that is my island destination. But obviously to get there, I'm going to risk getting wet, or even wetter. Now the question is, whether I take my boots off or just use speed as a defense. I think I'll use speed. Here we go. That wasn't so bad. What an amazing place. There's absolutely nowhere like this in the whole of the UK. It's only a wee scrap of island, a wee scrap of land, but it's an island in a loch, on an island, on a bigger loch, on a bigger island of Britain. It's amazing. If I had a wee flag, I'd plant it right there and claim it for myself.
In Victorian times, just as today, it was scenery like this that attracted the tourists. They came to see the untouched mountains, waterfalls, lochs and glens. They came to gaze and to be inspired. And with the tourists came the artists. Millais, Turner, Landseer, a litany of the greats, beating a path to the Highlands to experience the elemental beauty of nature. And they still come.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah.
To find out more about art and the elements, I'm going to be sketching this spectacular mountain, Sleach, with artist Mary Hedderwick. In 2001, Mary discovered a rare copy of a book by Victorian artist J.T. Reid, who toured the Highlands on foot, sketchbook in hand. Art Rambles in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. It's a beautiful book.
It's lovely, isn't it?
And these are his views.
I was thumbing through it, saw the engravings of the West Highlands and the Outer Islands, and thought, if I stand in the exact same place, 114 years later, will the view be the same?
Inspired by J.T. Reid's Odyssey, Mary undertook to follow in his footsteps, sketching the very same views that Reid had painted. Now we are sitting in what we think is the exact spot where John T. Reid drew this picture. That's a fantastic image that he's created.
Yeah, very dramatic.
We've got Sleach on a rather gloomy day.
Yes. Well, it was October when he was doing that, because he kept a kind of journal diary, so I knew the dates that he was in certain places.
So you came here
at the same time? Yeah.
Did you have to struggle against the elements?
Yes, it was cold. It was October. It was freezing. And there was snow on top of that blooming mountain. And the next day, it was just stair rods coming down.
Was it worth it?
Yes.
Now, Mary, I believe in Victorian times there was a school of thought that said that if you drew from nature, you'd somehow discover some fundamental truth. You begin to really look and really see.
Yeah, and question, I mean, why? You know, the land is formed the way it is. People wanted the light and the beauty of the wild spaces to remind them of this other part of their life, which was the appreciation of art and nature and elemental beauty. And it was a spiritual experience as well.
I can see why getting back into the elements
is important for people even today.
I love Scotland. I love it. It's magical.
It's extraordinary. Although I don't think I've quite captured it.
Oh, you're doing fine. Yes, you got the proportions right.
That's not bad.
That's pretty good. Hand and eye. See, mine's a bit more exaggerated. Look.
Well,
See, you've got a round, yeah.
Seeking further inspiration, I set off again, heading north, weather permitting, of course. Seeing Scotland at walking pace is perhaps the best way to appreciate how the weather adds to the drama of the landscape, and how the constantly changing light can transform the view in front of your eyes. But the unpredictable nature of Scotland's climate didn't charm everyone. American artists Elizabeth and Joseph Pennell, visiting in 1889, made their feelings clear. We have no hesitation in saying that our trip to Scotland was the most miserable. That the weather is vile is a fact that cannot be denied. To which all Highlanders know the reply, "Oh, if only you'd been here last week. It was just beautiful." But a Victorian pedestrian like the Reverend Grierson would have rejoiced in the challenge of walking through such a dramatic and rugged landscape in often difficult conditions.
In his book, the good Reverend scolds unpatriotic Scots for taking their holidays abroad. Why go to Switzerland, he asks, when we have such splendours on our doorstep, before lamenting the quality of the youth of his day.
I cannot help deploring the habits of indolence and effeminacy observable among young gentlemen in these modern times. They can scarcely be prevailed upon to extend their ramblings beyond the regions of silk stockings and feather beds.
I'm not sure what silk stocking ramblings the good Reverend had in mind, but I suspect his point was this: a real man should expose himself to the elements and not to effeminate luxuries.
At the risk of being labelled a silk stocking rambler myself, I'm afraid I'm about to wimp out of making the whole of my trip north on foot.
Now I've reached that point in my journey where I feel the need to take a break from elemental nature, rest my feet and take a bus. And what a beauty she is! A real blast from the past. I'm glad you stopped. My feet are killing me.
No problem.
Buses like these would have been a familiar sight on Highland roads 50 years ago. This one is driven by enthusiast Murdo McPherson.
Now, Murdo, what kind of bus is this? It's a wonderful machine.
This is a Bedford, 1957 through to about 1962.
So this bus is really a workhorse from the past.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Now, I imagine that some people, when they step aboard a bus like this, are taken back to their own childhood, to their own memories.
Oh, it happens all the time. Even seeing the buses brings a lot of memories back to people.
A new day finds us passing through the woods of Braemore on our way to Allapool.
When regular scheduled bus services began to operate in the 1930s, they opened up the previously inaccessible Highlands to everyone and made it possible for ever more adventurous visitors to enjoy a good hike in the wilderness. And there was plenty of wilderness to explore.
I remember the morning we left Allapool. Our eyes mounted on stalks. There was something to see every few yards. Cattle 1 minute, then sheep the next, peering first this way and then that. Though as a driver, you get used to looking both ways at once.
Do you ever get people Do you ever get people like that lady there who think that you are a service bus?
It has happened once or twice. If we're going in the direction that they're going in, there's nothing wrong with giving them a lift.
You can give them a lift?
Oh yes, yes. People are quite surprised when we actually stop and offer them a lift. And they're usually very grateful to us for that.
There's no railway up this side of Scotland at all, and it's still possible to meet a young crofter who hasn't even seen a train. We all fell silent for a long time.
I'm heading north into the wide open spaces of Assynt and some of the most breathtaking scenery to be found anywhere. Black says, "This may well be called a route of unsurpassable but treeless grandeur." Well observed, Mr. Black. Treeless and grand it is. And for me, I've always found it incredibly atmospheric.
I came here for the first time with my father. I was about 5 years old at the time, and it was late in the evening, and he stopped his car on the road over there to take a photograph of the sun setting behind these magnificent mountains. Now, this is a truly ancient landscape, and some of the oldest rocks in the world are found here. And just looking at it sends a shiver down my spine.
It's little wonder that writers sought inspiration from walking through wild places like this. Burns, Coleridge and Wordsworth all took to the hills. Joining me on this part of my trip is Roddy Woomble, songwriter and lead singer of the band Idlewild. Roddy often comes here to find his muse.
Roddy, Assynt is quite a significant place for you, is it not?
Yeah, well, about 10 years ago, I came here with a band Idlewild, and we wrote a collection of songs. And
Why did you choose to come here? It's not exactly the place you imagine a band would come to. It's big, it's bleak, it's the middle of nowhere, really.
that was kind of why, really. I mean, it was my first experience of sort of separating ourselves from all the distractions and somewhere that we knew, you know. And to go somewhere like this where it's just, you know, the possibilities are kind of endless because of the space. And subsequently it became a real favourite place for me to come back to, just for that reason, really.
Does the bleakness, I don't know, speak to your soul in some way? Because it is fantastically bleak and rugged here.
Yeah, there's something kind of almost supernatural about the way it looks. And it is to do with the space to think, I think. That's an important aspect of it, the space around you. And
there's a huge space here.
Yeah.
You can disappear into this space and never be found again.
As I continue on my journey north, I begin to understand how this stunning landscape could inspire artists and writers and lead many to ponder the inconsequential nature of man's existence. But leaving behind these existential musings, I must press on. The next stop on my itinerary is a place where the elemental forces of nature are very much apparent. The most northwesterly point of Scotland, Cape Wrath. To get to my destination, I'm making a short crossing over the Kyle of Jeunesse to what is surely one of the wildest and remotest places in Scotland.
Perhaps surprisingly, the name Cape Wrath doesn't come from the anger of the seas or from the wind, but from an Old Norse Viking word meaning turning point. When the Vikings saw this fearsome headland, they knew it was time to turn their longships and set sail northeast, home to Norway.
Over the centuries, many ships and seafarers have met their doom on this treacherous headland. But for the past 120 years, the Cape Wrath Lighthouse has stood guard. Black's guide describes it as a reassuring beacon of civilization. In this waste of waters, 2 individuals of the human race hold watch and ward to signal vessels off the inhospitable coast. There are no longer lighthouse keepers at Cape Wrath. But there is another form of reassurance here, in the middle of nowhere. A cafe where tired walkers can take a well-earned break.
Ah, hi. Could I have a cup of tea, please?
Yeah, no bother.
How civilized.
Cheers, thanks very much.
Having gone as far west as I can, I'm doubling back along the very top of Scotland, towards Thurso, named after the Norse god of thunder, Thor. But it's not the town that grabs my attention here, it's the sea, just as it did in Black's Day. The Bay of Thurso is a magnificent object and consists of a semicircular sweep of sandy beach on which the long line of breakers yield their power with hollow moan.
Blacks picks up on exactly why Thurso is popular with tourists today. The powerful waves here have been compared with those of Hawaii, making Thurso into a world-renowned surfing destination.
Every year, the world's top surfers descend on this small town to take part in the O'Neill Coldwater Classic, one of the premier international competitions. It may be hard to believe, but this surfer's paradise was first discovered by a handful of enthusiasts in the 1970s. And one of those early surfing pioneers was Pat Kieran, who came here in search of Thurso's famous wave.
Pat, can you tell me about this wave that everyone talks about?
Right, well, it's a world-class wave that was sort of surfed by a handful of us 30 or so years ago, and it's just gradually grown in fame through the different contests that we've had, and it's now legendary.
And how big does it get?
I've seen it 20 foot.
That is some wave.
It's quite frightening, actually.
And you yourself, Pat, in many ways are a Scottish surfing pioneer.
Yeah, well, I first came up here in 1976 as a student, just for the challenge.
Were you drawn by the sea? Were you drawn by the surfing adventure that was possible?
It was the waves that brought me up here, without a doubt.
I can't imagine there would have been very many surfers up here. The locals must have thought you were completely insane. I would have thought,
well, yeah.
Why go surfing here? It's freezing.
Well, that's right. I remember one day there was a guy, a local fisherman, was standing at the end of the pier, and he saw a guy out surfing, and he called the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard came through from Wick, 20 miles through, to save this guy, and he was just a surfer. He was fine.
People come here from all over the world to surf in these waters, and they're coming from places like Australia, New Zealand, Hawaii. I mean, what do they think of surfing in the icy north?
Well, they love it because it's the wave they come for. It's the wave itself.
But tell me, Pat, for you, what is the attraction of catching a wave?
It's just the freedom and the fact that every wave is different. You just don't know quite what you're getting yourself into. It's fantastic.
I think I'm going to find out for myself fairly soon.
You're all right.
Freedom's not what I'm thinking of, it's more the cold.
There obviously weren't many surfers in Victorian times, and I'm not entirely sure what they would have made of this rather peculiar pursuit, never mind the indignity of having to dress from head to toe in rubber.
I'm now going to attempt something that even the Reverend Grierson would have balked at. I'm going to walk on water.
To try to understand just what it is that compels people to brave the icy North Sea, I'm taking a lesson from champion surfer Sheila Finlayson before taking the plunge.
Sheila, I've got my board. What do I need to know now?
What you need to do is you need to lie in the port and paddle.
Right.
Like that. When you feel a wave coming towards you, I expect you to paddle.
Right.
Put your hands to the side of the board. bring yourself up like that, then 1 foot forwards.
Uh-huh.
And that's so. And
Right,
that's
so
you.
that's the tricky bit then.
Yeah.
So that's the theory. Seems pretty straightforward.
Right, I'm ready.
Excellent, but you'll need to lose the hat.
Right.
Time to pit myself against the elements.
Right, so when I get up on the board.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. That's good, Paul.
Encouraged by my early attempts and by Sheila's enthusiasm, I feel I'm ready for the tricky part. Actually standing up.
That's rubbish! Absolute rubbish! I had hoped to walk on water, but I just seem to have been caught in the undertow. I'm sure there's some kind of moral homily in that one.
And then suddenly, as if by divine intervention, everything seems to click. The perfect wave picks me up, and I almost feel at one with the elemental force of the sea. Well, maybe not.
I feel I'm defeated. Defeated by the waves.
No.
Defeated by the elements.
Oh, I think you did very well.
Disappointed. You're very kind, Sheila. There is a wave out there somewhere with my name on it.
There is, Paul.
I'm sure.
Undoubtedly.
I'm waiting for the perfect wave.
Half drowned by my surfing experience, I pull myself together to make the final leg of my journey. Having come this far, it would be churlish not to go to the traditional end point of all journeys to the north of Scotland.
Well, this is it, John O'Groats, which I have to say is just a wee bit underwhelming. And I've never really understood why so many long-distance journeys either begin or end here. You often hear of folk walking from Land's End to John O'Groats. But why? This is not the most northerly part of Scotland. It's not even the most northeasterly.
So to overcome my sense of anticlimax, I'm going to end my hike just along the road at the real edge of Scotland. If it's the elemental beauty of nature you're looking for, then this is the place to be.
I'm standing on the cliffs of Duncansby Head at the very top right-hand corner of Scotland. From this point, the coast runs west all the way to Cape Bath. Now behind me are the islands of the Pentland Firth, and behind them, Orkney. Now to the south, we've got the fantastic sea stacks of Duncansby that look more like shark fins or witches' caps.
These pinnacles of jagged rock are monuments to the relentless power of the sea and the raw force of nature.
What a fantastic place for me to end my grand tour in search of elemental beauty. I think I may have found it.
Next on Grand Tours of Scotland, I'm on a voyage to discover how visitors from all walks of life enjoyed the mighty Firth of Clyde.